October the 25th of 1919, my father married Harriet Wilmerth, so I had a new stepmother. We 3 children had a new stepmother. So my father moved his family into the old Methodist parsonage on Main Street in Canton. From there, he bought the store from Roy Elbow, the store in North Canton that has since been torn down. And that's where we lived, and I started school from that area. I remember that distinctly. At this store in Canton, we actually lived in the house next door to the store. Across from the store there was a pasture field. Back of the pasture field was a dairy barn owned by Luke Fogg, and that's where we used to go over and get our milk for our use and also for the store. In 1924, we started having electricity run through Canton, and that was a big moment in all of our lives. We only had like one light in each room, and we kids used to take turns turning the button on and off and push the button straight in the wall for our electricity. Also about this time, my grandfather, Joseph Richie, died. His death made an impact on Ethel and Herm and I on our later life. I can remember Charles Lindbergh crossing the ocean to Paris, Hilo Naval. I remember listening to this newscast on our little radio, which cracked and snapped quite a bit, but we could make sense out of it that he had landed safely. And also, later the same year was when my father purchased the store from my grandfather in South Canton. We all pitched in and got all settled in, and my dad did a terrific business. We sold everything. We sold gas out front that you had to pump things back and forth, the handle back and forth, to pump the big glass jar up top that would hold exactly 5 gallons. If you didn't want that, you let it loose till it went to 1 gallon. He also sold chicken feed, horse feed. We sold harness for horses. We sold coffee, and we ground it in the store. Came in loose in big bags, and we had to grind it. We had sugar came in 50-pound bags. We had to weigh that out in 2 or 5 pounds. Sometimes some people couldn't afford it. We'd go down to 1 pound. In 1932, my dad closed the store. We continued to live there, but he bought the Seabreeze Hotel. And Friday nights I would go down and work over the weekend. Sunday nights I would go back to go to school. At this time I was in Salem High School. I was also beginning to see Parky, and I were starting to go together, starting to date. This went on until 1934, and on June 15th, 1934, we were married. We went away the last day of school that year and ran away to Elkton, Maryland, and got married. In 1934, my dad sold his interest in Seabreeze Hotel to his half brother, Jesse Smith, and they bought the business on Hook Road, which was a bar, and he and mother and my brother moved up there. And at that time, Parky and I had, of course, were married, and we stayed at the store. We didn't have a store, we just stayed in the house part. Parky and I moved down to Stowe Creek Landing in a house that my father owned. I was 18 years old and a mother in very, very tough times. We didn't have very much, but we ate a lot of muskrat, a lot of duck, a lot of pheasant, a lot of rabbit, and raised a few chickens. My mother and dad were very good to us and helped us over a lot of those hard times. Times were extremely tough when we lived in Stowe Creek Landing. 2 small children and really didn't have any more than enough to eat. Again, my mother and dad helped us out considerably. They came down to visit one day, and my dad came up with a suggestion, why don't I buy the store? It wasn't being used. Why didn't I buy the store? And I said, with what? I mean, we had hardly enough to even get by on. We were living there rent-free anyway, but we just didn't have anything. And he said, well, you do have an inheritance from Grandpa Richie, don't you remember? Well, I really didn't remember this. And I said, well, I didn't know anything about it, but it would be wonderful. He said, well, let me see, maybe since you're going to buy a home with it, it might be possible to get it. By this time, I'm only 19. So in March of 1937, I bought the store property from my father. He accepted my $1,000 inheritance as part payment. I was given $2,500 total price for the property, and I had to make an arrangement for a mortgage for the other $1,500. Consequently, I paid $15.50 per month mortgage payments. And times were so rough when I first went in that store. Believe me, $15.50. It's very hard to come up with each and every month. Sometimes I would even get in arrears. Times were still rough, but I was trying and struggling and trying to make a success of the store, because after all, I only started with $200 worth of merchandise in the store, and I would spread it along the shelf, put the labels forward so it looked nice and full. I almost hated to sell it because the store looked so nice. Then, of course, I had to sell it to make enough profit to buy maybe 3 or 4 things the next day. And eventually, little by little, that's how I built it up. My business improved drastically after the attack on Pearl Harbor in December of '41. Franklin Roosevelt was president at the time, and he advocated we have rationing. Sugar and gasoline and various things were very short to come by. We bought our sugar in 50-pound bags, and we would weigh it up, and we'd actually hide it, because at that time we would have a lot of strangers coming into the store because they couldn't get sugar in their own hometown. But I felt that I should take care of the people that stuck by me and help me increase my business. February this 1944, my grandpa Smith died. He's the one that had started the store that was so important to our family. He's buried in Overlook Cemetery.
I was born in 1943 and was brought up at the store my great-grandfather Herman built. One of my first memories in life is of the day in 1946 that the front of the store was being modernized. There was a local man named Sam Williams who lived up in Canton and was a jack of all trades. My mother, Evelyn Parkell, hired Sam in the summer of 1946 to modernize the store porch by adding a new cement floor running the entire length of the store all the way to our driveway. Sam had fashioned a wooden bridge that ran from the edge of the road to the store door, so customers could still come in and leave without disturbing the cement until it was completely set. I remember watching through the store window as Sam put away his tools. The cement had been smoothed out and he was completely finished. I walked out barefoot onto the wooden bridge to see what he had done. As Sam put his tools into the car, I stepped down onto the wet cement. I walked the entire length of the porch, and just as I reached the end, I heard Sam let out a torrent of words I had never heard before, and turned in time to see him picking up a 2x4 and starting to run towards me. I took off down the driveway, not wanting to stay around to see what he was going to do.
At this time, I had 3 children in school, still running the store. Also, my father had a stroke, which forced him to sell his business on Hook Road. They bought a home on West Pittsfield Street and moved there to retire. His condition got progressively worse, and in 1948, in June, he died.